Good afternoon. I'm Callie Crossley. Have you ever dreamed of having 15 minutes to tell the president what's on your mind? Well, it's safe to say that none of us ordinary folk will actually end up in the Oval Office. Still, one Leicester, Massachusetts resident got that chance. Last week, B.J. Hill was invited to the White House for a chat with President Barack Obama. He took with him the uncensored comments of hundreds of Americans he met while walking across the country. And he's here in the studio with me with his feet up to tell us about it. Joining me to talk about what is on the minds of the people across the country is B.J. Hill. He is the purposeful walker and blogger behind Walk to the White House. B.J. Hill, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Callie. It's a pleasure to be here. It's not every day that you get to meet an Oscar-nominated producer such as yourself. That's great.
Well, coming after your meeting with President Obama, I'll take that as a high compliment. Thank you very much. So we're starting at the end of the book, so to speak, in that we know that you met with President Obama, and that was exciting. I don't want to linger there because I want to really take people through the journey of how you got there. So let's just for this moment say, was it exciting?
Yes, it was It was a project that was 4 years at least in the making, and the culmination really was getting to meet with the president in the Oval Office and hand him these books that I had collected from all over the country. So that was that was really the peak. That was what it all came down to. It was really like I've never been to the Olympics, but I want to say it was almost like being in the Olympics. It was like, training for 4 years and then getting up to that point and showing the world what you got. So.
And winning, because you can go to the Olympics and lose, but you got to go
Sure.
and win. All right, so let's start back at the beginning of your first journey. The old saying is a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, and that's exactly what happened to you in 2006. Mm-hmm. Why did you start walking?
Okay, sure. At the time, it was fall of 2006, and I had just broken up with my girlfriend. I was having difficulty finding employment. So when I was growing up, I was a Boy Scout. I'm an Eagle Scout, and so there was a time that I was thinking, I just need to take some time for myself. I need to get back to camping. I need to get back to hiking. So my plan was to walk across Massachusetts. I've grown up in Massachusetts, lived here for more than 30 years, and didn't really know a lot of parts of it. I knew Worcester, I knew Boston, but that's pretty much it. So my plan was to start in the northwestern corner of Massachusetts, up near Williamstown, and hike through western Mass into central Mass into Worcester. And at this point, I got to say, if I could take a second and say my thoughts are going out with the family of the Worcester Fire Department, who lost one of their own in a horrible fire last night. So to continue on through Worcester and down through southeastern Mass onto Cape Cod. So when I first started, I had no political reasons, but this was October of 2006, and a lot of people at the time, you probably remember, were talking about the big gubernatorial race it was a pretty vibrant four-way race between Kerry Healy, Deval Patrick, Christy Myhouse, and Grace Ross. About 3 days into the walk, I was invited to attend a town hall meeting in a little tiny town up near the Vermont border named Charlemont. And at the meeting, the state senator for the district was there, Senator Bosley. And I just had a sense of frustration that the residents in the town didn't believe that the lawmakers back in Beacon Hill really knew what was going on in their small community that was 2.5 hours away. So different needs, different priorities.
They felt they weren't being heard.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. And so later that night, I was camping out. I was in my tent, and I started to think that there had to be a way that I can amalgamize what I was doing, which was this walk across Massachusetts, with what needed to be done, which was to bring attention to these small communities through which I'd be passing. So the next day, I found a notebook and started asking people who I met along the way, if you could write one thing to the next governor, what would you write? And by the time I had finished on the tip of Cape Cod, a month later, I had hundreds of messages from all across the state. Of course, the big topics at the time were, tolls on the Mass Pike, healthcare, and casinos. And had the opportunity to meet with Governor Deval Patrick in his office shortly after he was inaugurated, hand him the books. Now, based on the success of that walk, I kind of wanted to extrapolate it to the
A bigger
entire
thing.
country.
But
Yeah.
before you leave that, let me just go back and say, all right, now you didn't plan to do this kind of walk, so then you go get a notebook. Okay, that's fine. What's your approach? You're just some guy walking up to people saying, "Hey, you want to write down something?"
And actually, what I found was that I'm definitely not I'm not super outgoing. I'm not a salesman. But what I found was that when I was walking, I had a sign on my backpack that had at the time had my website, walkacrossmass.com. So what I found is that people would actually approach me and say, "Hey, saw your sign. What are you up to? What's this Walk Across Mass thing?" And that made my job 10 times easier, because then I could say, "Well, this is what I'm doing. And by the way, would you like to write something for the governor?" And I found that most people, were willing. Not everyone, of course, but most people were saying, "Yeah, okay, I'll take a minute and write down a couple of words." So
Did they really, in writing it down, did they think this will ever end up, or was it more of a moment in time of just expressing whatever concern or frustration they may have had, even if they thought, "Oh, this guy, it's never going to happen, but I'm going to write it anyway"?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I'm not sure how many people were thinking, "Yeah, okay, this guy's going to meet with the president. All right, whatever." And I don't know how many people. I'd like to think that people actually believed that someone that could do something like this could actually it could actually happen. But it was interesting to see how people's reactions changed, because I had 3 walking across America, for example. I had 3 books, each about the size, a little larger than a Bible like you would find in a hotel. And so when one got filled up, I would send the other one home. So there are times, like in California and Illinois, when I sent the set, when they sent.
Now,
the
you're
first
talking
one
about
home.
when you decided to walk across America. I'm
Right.
still back at Massachusetts.
Oh, right. You're right.
Okay.
But some of the lessons that I had to learn from Massachusetts, were also the same as in when I walked across America. But anyways, but you're right. When the notebook was completely empty, like, and they were only writing like on page number 2, I'm sure they're like, okay, whatever. But after, especially those big books, when they see like hundreds of pages already filled.
So other people's comments, encourage people to write as well.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah.
You kept a blog while you were walking across Massachusetts, and I thought this was a great kind of last comment from it for people to hear. This was, you finally finished. You're about to finish. This was October 28th, 2006. And it's posted from the Cape Cod Inn in Provincetown. And you write, "David and I are just about to cross the breakwater and walk the 2.5 miles to Long Point. Before I finish this walk, I'd like to thank everyone who has helped me along the way, my friends, my family, the folks who have taken me in, given me food, or just stopped to say hi. For everyone who took a minute to write a message, even after this smelly, bearded vagrant approached them waving a pen and notebook and blathering about the government. This walk was dedicated to our elected leaders who run for office simply to serve others. It's also dedicated to my mother, Rita Hill, who passed away last summer. And this walk is for all the people of Massachusetts who brave stinging winter, scorching summer, rainy springs, and beautiful autumns, and cry when the Red Sox lose. I've been from Greylock to Long Point, and this walk is for all of those who call Massachusetts home. 2 miles to go." I thought that was quite beautiful.
Thanks.
And very expressive about that experience. So after this, 2 miles to go, you finished, and then you did sit down with the then elected governor, Deval Patrick. And we should note that when you were gathering the comments for Massachusetts, people didn't know who the governor would be, so they couldn't direct it to him specifically. They were just writing in general about what they wanted the new governor to do.
Exactly. Yep. Mm-hmm. And the same again. I know that we're not on the Walk Across America yet, but the same thing when I started, because I started in March of 2008. And
well, wait a minute. You just can't walk into the governor's office, BJ. How'd you get in there?
That's good. That's a good question. At the
I mean, I know it's old hat to you having been to the White House, but
hey, I make a phone call. I make things happen.
Yeah.
It's a lot of clout and walking. No, for that case, I have to thank then Senator Ed Augustus from Worcester, who really made it happen, who really put the pieces in place for me. And
And the governor was interested in, I mean, why would he be? I'm curious about why the governor's like, okay, let me give this guy a few minutes.
Right.
What did he say to you?
At the time, I came into his office. I was introduced. I shook his hand. We took a couple of photos, and then in the corner office, there's his desk, and there's a table on the other side of the room. So we sat down at the table, and we went over some of the messages. He looked at and some of the places that I had walked through, some of the places that I had been, especially in Western Massachusetts, he had also been too, on the campaign trail. So we had a couple of stories in common. In some of the smaller towns, and we talked about. At the time, we talked about high-speed internet for Western Massachusetts, and because that was a big priority. I met a lot of people at craft fairs, for example, and these are artisans, glass blowers, for example, who they have studios, they have their own workplace, but it's so hard to sell
to get out,
when you only have like a
Right.
dial-up connection.
Right.
So they're trying to like load up their pictures on the internet, and it's like that noise,
Yeah.
So the economy really runs, especially in that part of the state. The economy really runs on high-speed internet, and that was one of the things that he, that was on his agenda for his, for his administration, is to, get those folks up into, the 21st century. So.
Now, you mentioned that some people wrote about casinos at the time, and that wasn't on his agenda at the time. It has since become, and he's signed the law that's made it possible. Can you recall what people were writing about casinos during that time?
Yeah, if I remember correctly, I don't think I saw anyone. I don't think I remember anyone who was anti-casino.
So they were really for.
Yeah, they were for
interesting.
casinos.
Okay.
It wasn't a huge topic. Not everyone was talking about it, but that was an issue that came up across the state, especially on Cape Cod, because unfortunately, as we know, the economy, when it's not tourist season, the economy down there is really it really needs a shot in the arm. So a lot of people down down on the Cape felt that perhaps building a casino on or near the Cape would really do wonders for the bottom line.
So how many notebooks did you have at the end of the walk up for Massachusetts?
That was one notebook. That was a spiral bound notebook. Probably it was like one size down from like the 8.5 by 11 notebook. So yeah,
Love the specificity.
Yes.
All right, but later you ended up with many more notebooks, and we're going to talk about that. My guest is B.J. Hill. He walked across the country collecting messages from the folks he encountered along the way. He ended up with thousands of handwritten notes, which he hand-delivered to President Obama last week. In a few minutes, we'll hear from Senator John Kerry on why he helped to arrange this meeting between the president and B.J. Hill. We're opening up the lines, 877-301-8970, 877-301-8970. What would you tell the president if you had a chance to hand deliver him a note? Do you think the president is listening? 877-301-8970, 877-301-8970. You're listening to 89.7 WGBH, Boston Public Radio. Welcome back to the Callie Crossley Show. If you're just joining us, my guest is B.J. Hill. He's logged hundreds of miles, crossing the country on foot, collecting messages from everyone he encountered. He started in 2006 walking across Massachusetts, and then he walked across America. His intention was to give these notes to President Obama, which he did last week. We're taking your calls at 877-301-8970, 877-301-8970. What would you write to the president? Who is the next person you'd like to see BJ collect notes for? 877-301-8970, 877-301-8970. So, BJ, you did your walk in 2006. You met Governor Patrick. You delivered those notes, and then you hung up your walking shoes, so to speak, for a while. Why did you decide to put them back on in 2008 and start walking across America?
Walking cross country has always been kind of it's always kind of been a dream of mine ever since I was a kid. I read a great book when I was uh, probably in middle school. I think it was called A Walk Across America by Peter Jenkins, and another called The Walker's Journal by Robert Sweetgal. And those were books that I read when I was, growing up, and they always kind of stuck with me. So, and in 2007, things were kind of coming together that it was more or less, okay, if I wanted to do this walk, I have experience doing the walk across Massachusetts, so I'm not going into it completely green. But if I want to do this walk, I need to do it sometime soon, before I get older, before I settle down, before I have a family to consider. So, I started sending out some emails, started sending out some feelers, started to think, okay, this worked.
To who are you sending emails and feelers to?
Other people who have done the walk.
Oh, God,
I
okay,
did,
just to get
yeah,
advice. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. I've done, did some more research. Looked at web pages of other people who've crossed country on foot, saw what worked for them, what didn't work. Thought about my own walk across Massachusetts, and it was the best that I can compare it to maybe is starting a small business, as starting your own business, as in saying, okay, you have to think about everything from location to finances to transportation to what are the business cards going to look like. All those things are like running through your mind, and it's a great feeling. It really is. I mean, if you're great at multitasking, this was, you have all these different factors all going to the success.
Did you know at the beginning that this time you wanted to collect notes for the president? Because before, when you started, it was more of and then midway through you realize, hey, let me collect the notes from people.
Right, yeah, and that was exactly the reason. I mean, I could have started it for any number of reasons or causes. I mean, I've met cross-country walkers who are walking walking to raise money for cancer, for example. Met cross-country walkers who are walking to raise awareness for veteran rights. In my case, I really enjoyed talking to people about politics. I really enjoyed what I did in 2006. I felt that it really could make a difference. So in 2008, and especially in 2008, coming in with no incumbent, the vice president wasn't running. It was probably one of the most important, unique presidential elections, that we'll see in our lifetime. So, yeah, and so that was the cause from day one. So, yeah.
What was the tone of the notes you were capturing in 2008?
In 2008, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, not now. In 2008. Yes.
In 2008, I started in March before before people knew to whom they were writing, because at the time, as of March 1st, all of the Republicans had dropped out except John McCain, and Hillary Clinton was still in the race. Mm-hmm. So I got a handful of messages to people who were convinced that either Senator McCain or Senator Clinton was going to win. So their messages started, "Dear Mrs. Clinton, we're so glad that you won."
No, okay.
But the number one theme or topic that I found as I walked from California east was the price of gas, because that was the summer that gas prices were hitting, were in some cases over $4 a gallon. A couple of the other topics were the war on terror, the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, the environment, education, and then there were some smaller. I definitely remember there were some messages that were very location-centric, things like, mining rights, for example. Of course, that was in Nevada. Mm-hmm. But towards the end of the summer, as I was coming through Alabama into Georgia, it was almost as if someone had flicked a switch, and that was when gas prices returned to normal towards the end of August, early September. And suddenly people started realizing that there was something going on with the economy. So the number of messages dealing with, unemployment, dealing with the budget, they definitely shot up. And that lasted from, I would say, probably September or October of 2008, right around the time of the bailouts, I believe, all the way up until January of 2009 when I finished in Boston. Now, when to jump ahead, but when I did this walk in 2011, that's where people, it's almost as if I started again the very next day, because people again were talking about that. That was right on the top of people's minds.
The economy.
The economy,
yes.
exactly.
And were people optimistic when you talked to them in 2008?
In 2008, they were definitely. People were concerned, but they were also optimistic. I mean, I'd like to think that in any presidential year, people are going to be optimistic because either you have the choice to re-elect your man, or elect the person that you would prefer in office. So I think people were optimistic, especially in the third book of messages, and that was the book that was messages between election night and inauguration
That must have
day.
been pretty.
Yeah. And especially because at that time people knew to whom exactly they were writing. It was definitely President-elect Barack Obama.
What parts of the country were you in during that?
I was
period?
in a very black part of Greensboro, North Carolina. And
I can imagine those.
Right,
Yeah,
coming through that neighborhood, it
yeah.
was really neat to see some of those messages, see what people had written during the days leading up to, the day of, and the days after the election, especially. So,
What was it like, or did you think of yourself in that moment that you were really a witness to history in some way, in a very different way than you would be having a dinner party with some friends and chit-chatting about what they think and what I'd tell the president? This is quite different.
yeah, that's right. And I guess when you say witness to history, that kind of gives me a little tingle on the spine. But I did make copies of the messages, and before I handed them over to the president. But
I mean, in the moment, did you understand that that's what was happening?
That's, I don't know. It's not really, when you're doing a walk like this, you kind of lose the bigger picture, because
You're just day to day.
You really are day to day, because
Okay.
instead of thinking, oh man, I'm catching the spirit of the nation, it's more like, man, what are we going to eat tonight? Or I hope I have a place to pitch my tent, or I gotta, my shoes have a hole in them, things like that. So,
Okay.
so it really does put it into perspective. So.
Victoria Welch wrote this piece about when you finished your 2008 walk. She said, on Sunday, after 4,200 miles, 7 pairs of shoes, and enough encounters to fill 3 books full, Hill capped his travels by arriving back in Boston and dropping to his knees so that he could kiss the snow-covered ground at Copley Plaza. With those final steps, Hill officially brought his walk across America 2008 to a close. So at the end of that walk, you had yet to meet the president, and did you, at the moment, did you say, well, that's just not going to happen? You put it aside. How did it all come together?
Okay. Kind of interesting. In 2008, through Senator John Kerry's office, I had tickets to the inauguration. I went down to the inauguration. I was really hoping that I'd get a phone call or an email.
Okay, how come you got tickets to the inauguration from Senator John Kerry's office?
The short version is, I'll try to make it short.
Yes,
but,
the short version.
In 2006, I walked across Massachusetts.
Yeah.
In 2008, there was another person who was walking across Massachusetts for veterans' rights. He was working with Senator John Kerry's office. As we know, Senator Kerry does a lot with veteran affairs. And he had contacted me totally out of the blue, said, hey, I saw that you already did this. Just wanted to, kind of pick your mind, et cetera. And I was like, well, coincidentally, I'm actually walking cross country, but hey, if you need a place to stay, if you need, media contacts, let me know. I know some places that, that you'll be walking through. He finished his walk on the steps of the State House, and at the end he said, "Hey, listen, thanks for all the help. If there's ever anything that you need, let me know." And so I said, "Well, actually, I know that it's all about connections, it's all about networking." And I said, actually, I know that you said that you'd worked with Senator Kerry's office. I was wondering if you might be able to share your contact. So he gave me the email address of the woman with whom he was working there.
And that happened, and you got to go to the inauguration.
Yep.
So I want the details of how it finally came together, but we know that Senator Kerry had a big part of that. And we recorded a conversation with Senator Kerry earlier this week and asked him why, out of all the requests he gets, did he agree to facilitate a meeting between you and President Obama? What about his quest, his gathering of these names resonated with your staffer that thought well, gee, I'll give him a shot to sit down with the president?
Well, it resonated with all of us because I think it really represents sort of real messaging, real people, real talk, rather than some of the kind of crazy, contrived, traveling reality show circus that we see in the presidential race and in politics today. I think there's something very human and fundamental about it, and it appealed to me and appeals to me to this moment. I mean, these are real voices from America speaking to the president through the remarkable commitment and journey of one person.
Are there any specific comments or questions that were in any of the books that you may remember you thought quite poignant, pointed, whatever? How would you care? However you would.
Well, I think they're all. I mean, I think all of them are really very special about America. And, you know, the last book actually was the one the president was sort of more interested in, and I think part of the reason for that is that it's kind of representative of what's going on right now at this moment. Of course, BJ, you know, went to a couple of Tea Party events and things. So I think it's kind of a cross-section of what America is thinking and where America's spirit is right now.
Well, part of what America is thinking in the books that in the comments that he gathers is just the level of frustration with elected representatives. As you know, I'm sure you know the figure that only 9% of people right now think Congress is doing a good job, and that suggests, along with the folks who are in the occupied camps, that people are feeling that their voices are not heard. Certainly, he's been able to take some of those voices so they can be seen and heard right to the White House. But why does that persist? I mean, elected representatives say, we want to be in touch with you. We're meeting with you. But yet people are not feeling they're being heard.
Well, 9% is probably about 8% more than it ought to be, in my judgment. You know, I think that Congress is gridlocked because we have a group of people here. I know this is going to sound like I'm pointing a finger at somebody, but I am, I guess, in a very direct way. You know, I just got off the super committee where we spent 3 months trying to deal with America's fiscal plight. We put a plan on the table that we thought was balanced. It required sacrifice from everybody. It was fair. It had a $4 trillion solution attached to it, with everybody being part of the solution. And it was refused again and again and again because a small group of people here believes that the wealthiest people in America need to be protected and not pay additional revenue. That's just the bottom line. The bottom line is we are in ideological gridlock. The bottom line is a small extreme group of people has decided to stop everything. And I mean stop everything. So I'm going to tell it like it is.
So many of the people in BJ's notes are saying they feel the system is broken, as you've just expressed, and they don't know what to do. They're frustrated.
The system isn't broken. The people are broken. This is the same Congress that worked with Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan. Same rules, same Congress, just different people with a different attitude. And the bottom line is, you know, change the people. Change some of the people who won't work for compromise. Change the people who are doing this gridlock. I mean, that's why we have elections. The system is not broken if you have an election. Now, it's harder nowadays because of the amount of money in these elections. That's broken. The Supreme Court unleashed a torrent of money to the American political system by approving corporations to be treated like people with their rights under the First Amendment to be able to put unlimited amounts of money without even knowing who they are. I think that's one of the worst decisions in United States court history. And that is hurting the system, frankly.
So, Senator Kerry, if BJ bumped into Citizen Kerry, what would you have written?
I would have expressed the very frustration I just expressed to you, that we need people who are responsible and courageous, who are prepared to put country ahead of party, who are prepared to take a courageous vote and perhaps put their own political life at risk in doing so. That's what we need, patriotism.
Any comment for any future BJs out there?
Go for it. I think it's terrific. Only I hope they'll put some of that energy into electing the people who will make a difference.
On a slightly different note, but I got to ask because it's out here, There's one of your fellow congresspersons is talking about doing a secret Santa to try to bring you guys all together in some kind of united way.
We're doing that. We're doing that next Monday.
You're going to do it? Are you participating?
Yeah, next Tuesday. Yes, I am. I am giving a present to. I think he's going to be surprised.
I hate to tell you this, but I don't think you're supposed to tell
I don't think I'm allowed to say that, am I? I just screwed it up.
It's Secret Santa.
Listen, you have to edit that.
Okay.
Will you please edit that for certain?
All right.
Protect me here.
You can tell us what you got. You want to say?
God, no, I'm not allowed to say it.
Okay.
It might even be. I may even have the wrong person.
Well, then it'll really be a surprise. Senator
guess
Carey,
it'll be
thank
a
you.
surprise.
Thank you so very much.
Goodbye.
Thank you. That was Massachusetts Senator John Kerry, who facilitated the meeting with B.J. Hill with President Obama last week. You're listening to 89.7 WGBH and online at WGBH.org. And if you're just tuning in, my guest is B.J. Hill. He walked across the country collecting notes from everyone he encountered. He hand-delivered those messages to President Obama last week. So when you finally got the call that you were going to get the meeting with President Obama, you went out and walked again because you wanted to have fresh material. And you've brought in some of the notes that you've scanned, and they really run the gamut from people who are quite angry with him to those who are just acknowledging that, here's one, keep up the good work you're doing. My prayers are with you and your family. I can't begin to imagine what a challenging job it is to lead the country. Keep working hard. Don't let us down. What did he do when you got in the room and he started to read these notes? What was his response?
So, like Senator Kerry said, I mean, he was looking through some of the first messages from 2008, but he was particularly interested in the fourth book of messages. I got a couple as he was looking through them. He was kind of angled away from me, so I don't know exactly which ones he was looking at.
And you didn't ask?
Well, actually, one that I know he did look at for certain, because over the years, this one was from 2008, and over the years I've gotten to know many of the messages pretty well since I've had the books for so long. And he flipped to one page, and I noticed that it was open, and I said, Mr. President, you should read that one. That's pretty strong, just the first sentence. And the very first sentence was, Dear Mr. President, my father was just deported last week. And it was from a young woman who attended Brigham Young University in Salt Lake City, and her father had come from Nigeria in the 1970s. Started a family here in America, was working, and somehow in early 2008, INS or ICE had caught up with him, arrested him, and sent him back to Africa, where he had not been in over 3 decades.
Wow.
So, naturally, she was, concerned she was upset about that. She was concerned for his safety, about, for her family, and even about her own, her own status. So she wrote about 2 pages on that, and that was one that I know for sure that he read. The other ones, however, he was flipping through them, and he was kind of angled away from me. So I don't know exactly which ones he read, but I got a couple hmms out of him, and even cracked a smile a few times, because some of the messages, as you can see from those, they're kind of quirky, a little off the cuff, kind of funny, and
you noted a lot of complimentary ones to Michelle Obama.
Yes, yeah, that's right.
So
yeah,
maybe he smiled at those.
Yeah.
Yes.
But to answer your question, in this last walk, I think just by flipping through, I think you'll see that there is a lot of support from the people who wrote for the president. There is a streak of anti-Obama messages which can be traced probably to the Tea Party rally that I went to in Connecticut. But on the whole, there is a lot of support for his reelection in 2012. Also, some
there is a comment
concern
here that says, "Get out of my country."
Yep.
Dear President Obama, get out of my country.
And that was actually was not from the Tea Party rally. That was here on Route 9 here in Massachusetts.
There you go.
But so there's a lot of support, but there's also a lot of concern about where the government's going. That said, I also met a lot of. But then again, I mean, I was walking this time only from Boston to Washington, D.C., passing through a lot of generally blue states on my trip. Had I, redone the entire walk and, started from California, had I, if I had time, if I could walk it in 1 month, then I probably would have gotten a lot of different messages as I went through states that are normally red, for example. But, these states are pretty, up here in the Northeast are pretty much, it's kind of Obama territory. So I wasn't really expecting too many anti-Obama messages to begin with.
Maybe this is a question you can't quite answer, but we're all curious. Can you tell whether he was really absorbing the messages or it was just because you were there and Senator Kerry sent you and, he had to be nice?
Yeah, that's right. And honestly, I really have no way to tell. I mean, just like when I handed the messages over to Governor Patrick, once they're in his hands, they're out of my hands. So,
and you delivered the original books to President Obama.
Yep, that's right. I would like to think that, at least they're a handsome, like leather-bound kind of journal. At least maybe we'll keep them around for decoration, decorative, sake. But, before I left, I asked, I'm like, well, Mr. President, there's just two things that I might ask of you. One is to actually spend time looking at these messages, and he said he would, or he said, I'm sorry, they would, or we would. That's what we would. That's what he said. Which I'm not sure if that meant he and his staff, or he and his family, or hopefully both. And the second I asked him was if, for historical purposes, if they were archived properly. And he said he would have a librarian come in and take a look at them and deem what was best for them. So they'll probably end up in the presidential library, and wherever that will be.
Where some future Doris Kearns Goodwin will discover them
and
use them in a book.
Yeah, it's really neat to think. I mean, what if they really are a treasure of what people were thinking, at the turn of the century, right. 200, 300 years from now, some historian will stumble across them. So.
Last question. As a result of this journey, do you feel a particular sense of Americanism yourself? Not from what you gather from others, but just from your doing this?
I think so, yeah. I mean, it is, case in point, I mean, it's easy to brush off. I mean, I lived in Boston before I did this walk, and I mean, I have to admit, for Bostonians, anything like west of 495 might as well be a whole different universe out there, And but going cross country now, I really do know. I know families, I know people in Utah, in Alabama, in Missouri. I could pick up my phone and text someone and say, "Hey, what's the weather like in Illinois today?" So I would never go to like Red Bud, Illinois, or Metropolis, Illinois, without this, before this walk. And it really comes full circle. Back in the spring, the Red Cross, I'm also a Red Cross volunteer. They contacted me. They said, "Hey, we have these awful tornadoes in Alabama," which I didn't even know about. Like I wasn't watching the news or anything. They had these awful tornadoes in Alabama. Would you be able to go? And I said, "Oh, what part of Alabama?" And they're like, "Well, like Florence, Gadsden." I'm like, "Oh my God, I walked through there. Like I know people there. Like sign me up." I went down there and spent 2 weeks helping the doing my small part to help the community get back on its feet. There was a newspaper reporter who had covered me in 2008, real quick. Newspaper reporter who covered me in 2008, and he came out to visit me again. And for a story, he said, what about those books? And I said, because of this, I'm going to, by the end of the summer, and I renewed and sent out some emails and got the message, and I got the interview with the president. So, yeah.
All right. So. Well, B.J. Hill, American writ large.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We've been talking to B.J. Hill about his meeting with President Obama last week. To learn more about B.J. Hill's Walk to the White House, log on to walktothewhitehouse.wordpress.com. From the White House, we're off to the newly renovated African Meeting House. You're listening to the Callie Crossley Show on WGBH, Boston Public Radio.